Hello again, my friends. Lovely to be with you again. There's a beautiful story told of an old man who was travelling to Mecca in the depths of winter. Freezing cold, terrible weather, and he was really struggling. And he stopped at an inn for a little bit of respite. And the innkeeper said to him, "You'll never get to Mecca in this weather, old man." And the old man replied, "My heart got there a long time ago. My body will follow." It's a beautiful story, isn't it? My heart got there a long time ago. We're talking this month about anticipation, about looking forward, I guess. And I think the story of the old man is particularly significant because his expectations were realistic. I think sometimes where I go wrong, maybe others do too, is when our expectations are not realistic. So we're not. So they're not based on Christian hope. The story of the old man again brings us back to that sense of hope. He was going to Mecca, so it may not have been Christian hope, but it was that sense of Yahweh, of God. And I believe that if we can keep our anticipation, which is what we're talking about this month, if we can keep that anticipation based on Christian hope, it allows us to realise that life is not fair, but it's still good. Life isn't fair, but it's still good. And therefore, if the thing that the experience, the event that we're anticipating in a positive way doesn't meet our expectations, we're not devastated. We just are able to shrug it off and say, well, didn't come up to my expectations, but that's okay. Yeah, I think we tend to base too much emphasis on our expectations instead of looking at life through the lens of Christian hope, of what God has in store for us. This morning's gospel was that lovely passage from Matthew where Jesus says to his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Who do you say I am? And if you look at that out of context, you think, gosh, even Jesus is looking to, as a human being, to get some sort of positive feedback about who he is. But the context is that he goes on then to talk about his coming suffering and appalling death. He knows that's going to happen. So his anticipation is one of horror and terror and terrible, terrible suffering. He's able then, out of that, he's able to look at that realistically, to know that that's where his destiny lies, terrible though it is, but that out of that will come salvation for all humankind. And I think when we're talking about anticipation, we need to keep the context that God can always bring good out of our letdowns, our events that turn to custard. Even God can do that. Yeah, it's a different sort of lesson, isn't it? So the old man in our story had his heart at Mecca many, many, many years before. He was not going to be let down by anything because he knew that the very horror of the journey, the very perils of the journey were part of getting his old body there. So yeah, anticipation, I think, my friends, is that if we can base it on Christian hope, on that sense that no matter what happens, God can bring good out of it if we allow God's movement through it. We're not talking here, are we, about just being optimistic. We're not talking about us all being Pollyannas. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking because when the event is actually very serious and maybe full of some kind of dying, loss and grief, there is still the message of Christian hope in that. We can still take Jesus' hand. And you know, somebody sent me an email yesterday which said something like, nobody, not anybody, ever refers to Jesus as the late Jesus. It's true, isn't it? Even people who don't believe in him never refer to him as the late Jesus. In other words, he is alive. He's been alive for 2,000 years. What more could we ask? That's our Christian hope, that Jesus is alive. We are already redeemed. So some of our events and experiences are going to be pretty awful. They're not going to work. They're not going to be working out as we had hoped. But that if we've got that Christian hope, we're going to be disappointed but not devastated. And isn't that great? You know what the cynics say, just as I was getting used to yesterday, along came today. Well, you know, something like that. So those are some random thoughts about this quite difficult subject of anticipation. But I try to base mine, if I can, on that sense of being with God. Our founder, the founder of the congregation I belong to, Mary Potter, lived always in the presence of God. She was a true mystic. And she used to say things like, she wrote, for example, on one occasion, hope is a flower that grows only on earth and blooms best in adversity. Get that? Blooms best in adversity. So, thank you for being with me today. Go well. Go with your God.